Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to episode 52 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this episode, we're going to continue on with our look at the Ultrabeat, which, as I said in the previous video, is a synthesizer, a sampler, as well as a step sequencer. And today we're going to take a look at most of the synthesis features of the Ultrabeat. Not all of them, but I'll go through most of the important ones. All right, so if you watched the previous video, I kind of ended the video with this drum pattern. We dragged in some samples, we tweaked them a little bit, and we ended up with this drum pattern. So if you want to figure out how to actually use the step sequencer, how to drop the pattern down to the arrange window, and how to drag and drop in samples to build your own custom drum kits, then you're going to want to watch the previous video. So let's talk about maybe how to start modulating some of these sounds and tweaking them with Ultrabeat's synthesis capabilities. I might have said this in the previous video, but each of Ultrabeat's voices here, each of the kind of the lanes, as I call them, has a different synthesis window. So each synthesizer will be different for each voice. So what that means is you have basically highly customizable control over each voice. So let's start maybe like with our kick drum here. I'm just going to solo out the kick here and hit play. So we get kind of a snappy sounding kick there. Actually, go ahead and turn the filter off because I need to demonstrate that. But first, let's just take a look at this slider right here. This is Oscillator 2's pitch control. So Oscillator 2 includes the sample load-in area that we looked at in the previous video where we dragged in this kick drum. The pitch control allows us to up-tune or down-tune any sample. So by default, samples are pitched at C3, even though technically, you know, a kick drum doesn't have any definite pitch. They're just using C3 as a pitch reference. So if I wanted to drop the pitch in the kick drum, I would just pull this down. I'm going to get a deeper kick. Or if I pull it up, I'm going to get a higher kick. For the kick drum, I'm going to pull it down just a hair, not too much though. There we go. The other thing we can do is we can control the volume right here of this individual oscillator just by grabbing the middle of this and pulling it up or down. Right now, there's actually a modulation effect set up on it to control the volume via velocity. So this kind of blue option here just says max, that's the source. And then the velocity here in green is the via. You can click on either of these and change them. We're not going to go too deep into all of the via controls, but you can actually make an LFO or one of the envelopes control the volume of this one oscillator. I'm pretty much just going to leave this alone, but I will come back to modulating other things like in the filter or modulating the noise generator. So I'm pretty much just going to leave this alone. When you use the drag and drop samples kit, it automatically sets up the sample oscillator this way so that when you pull up or pull down the velocity of a note, it also affects the volume of it. So that's basically all that does. Let's come up to the filter here. You can turn the filter on just by clicking here, and then you can make an oscillator go to the filter by clicking right here. So this just looks like a little flathead screwdriver screw. It basically means that this oscillator is not going to the filter, and you click on it, you get the arrow, it means it is going into the filter. And by the way, you can send the top oscillator up here, which we'll look at in a moment. You can send this into the filter, and you can also send the noise generator into the filter as well. So we'll take a look at those later. So filters, typical, simple filter. It's got four different types of filters: low pass, high pass, band reject. Low pass cuts out high frequencies while allowing lows. High pass allows highs through while cutting lows. Band pass allows a middle band of frequencies through, and band reject cuts a middle band of frequencies. And then the 12 and 24 are the slopes. So a 12 dB slope is going to be more gradual than a 24 dB slope. So What we can control here is a cutoff frequency. That's what this cut knob is, and resonance, just like any typical filter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the modulation here. I'm just going to say off, just so I have just a red knob here with no green or blue on it. And basically, this just controls the cutoff frequency. So if I use a low-pass filter and start pulling this down, you're going to see more and more of the high frequencies scooped out of the signal. So we get a kind of a warmer sound. And likewise, with high pass, as I pull it down, or pull it up rather, you're going to hear more and more of the low scooped out. So I'm not going to use that on a kick drum. I am going to use the low pass on the kick drum. But one thing I want to show you is you can actually control where this cutoff is. You can modulate the cutoff based on the velocity of a note. You can see here I have different velocities for my kick hits. I've got some that are kind of quick and have lower velocities, and others that are right on the downbeat that are a little bit louder. So what I can do is I can say the modulation source here in blue, I can say I want that to be max. And then the via is velocity. So what I'm doing is I'm controlling the maximum value of the cutoff by velocity. So what you'll see when you choose these two options is you get a little green slider, and you actually get a little blue slider in here as well as the red control as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the blue to max. I'm going to pull it all the way up, and I'm going to pull the green one down a bit. And basically what I'm doing is I'm creating a range for velocity to control the difference between this slider and this slider. And so basically louder velocities are going to be more up here at the top, basically an open filter. Lower velocities are going to be more down here at the bottom, and so we'll get sounds that are a little more filtered. So let's see what this sounds like. And actually what I did there is I actually did it in reverse. I need to switch these. The green needs to go on top. The blue needs to go on the bottom. And they get a little confusing. Sometimes they're hard to see the colors, and you kind of get lost because there's 3 different kind of sliders on one knob. So let's try that again. And let me just kind of pull one of these other ones down just so you can hear it a little better. So the notes that have lower velocities are the ones that have more filter on them. So this is a great way to kind of just simulate quick, kick drum hits. And typically, when a real drummer hits a kick drum more quickly, something like this, like a do-do sort of thing, the first kick is not hit as hard. The second kick that's on the downbeat is hit harder. So that results in not only a volume change, but also sort of like a tonal change. And there's also a resonance knob. It just boosts the signal at the cutoff frequency. Resonance is essentially just feedback, so sometimes you'll get a little more crispiness, or I call it frogginess in the low range, or you'll get a bit of a ringing sound in the upper range. I'm not going to use that for the kick drum. Another option contained within the filter here is the distortion unit. There's basically 2 modes for it. There's crush and then distort. Distort is more or less kind of like an overdrive unit. It almost sounds like a tube distortion. Crush is actually a bit crusher, kind of like the bit crusher plugin that's included with Logic. So if I pull up the drive here and pull up the color and the clip amount, you'll hear a noticeable difference in the tone. And then the distort mode, it's more like a tube overdrive. But it kind of cuts out the low end when I use that. So I'm not going to use this on the kick drum, but we will use it on the snare drum. One other control in the filter is you can control the signal flow of how the oscillator goes into the filter and whether that signal goes to the distortion unit first or whether it goes to the filter first, because there is a noticeable difference. Let me turn the crush unit back on there. And this little arrow determines whether basically it controls the direction of the signal. So if it's up like this, it means that the signal from the oscillators goes into the distortion unit first, then goes into the filter. If you click on it and flip it around, that means the signal goes into the filter first, then into the distortion unit. Not causing us too much of a noticeable difference here, but we will hear that difference when we add this to the snare drum. All right, let's take a look at our first oscillator up here. The first oscillator is limited in that it doesn't have the sample function that the second oscillator did, but it does have some other things that kind of it makes up for it. So first of all, it has a phase oscillator option, which means that it's basically just a regular synthesizer oscillator. You know, you can produce a sine wave. If you pull up the slope, you can kind of morph it into a triangle wave. If you pull up the asymmetry and the slope, you get sort of like a sawtooth. And then if you pull up the saturation, it kind of truncates the signal and you get something like a square wave. So you can get all of your four main oscillator waveforms out of the phase oscillator. And by the way, oscillator 2, the one that we used for our sample, also has a phase oscillator as well. You just have to switch it to that mode. Now, the phase oscillator basically is going to allow us to layer our sample down here with just a regular synthesizer waveform. For now, I've turned off oscillator 2 because I just want to hear oscillator 1 by itself. So let me just click on the key here. Yeah, you can barely even hear it. And the reason for that is that the tuning is down at C0. So let me pull this up a bit. I'm going to put this on C1. And the reason why I'm using C1 is because I know offhand that these little synth hits that we we dragged in there in the previous video, I know that the low one is a C, so I just want to kind of keep the tonality the same. So I'm going to make my oscillator C1 as well. So let me just try that again. There you go. So we're getting kind of like a low sine wave. Let me pull the volume up a bit so we can hear that better. There we go. I can pull up the slope, the asymmetry, get more of like a sawtooth sound. And then I can pull up the saturation and get more of like a square wave sound. So what you can do is when you have both of these on, it will layer them together. And so you can kind of reinforce the kick drum with an actual tone. You know, here it's C1. So with just the phase oscillator on, it's going to sound like this right now. And then with the kick on, there we go. Actually, let me turn off the distortion unit there. So it's kind of cool that you can layer a kick drum with another sound. What I'm also going to do is the kick is a bit, the phase oscillator is a bit long. And actually one thing I did in between videos was on my fourth envelope here. Remember that controls the volume of basically the whole of the, well, it's an output volume envelope, so it controls kind of the volume of everything. And we said that when you pull the release all the way out, it plays the full sample. The problem with that is that with the phase oscillator on, we're going to get a note that just plays indefinitely. Well, it plays for 10 seconds actually. So a way to fix that is to click on the zoom here. That'll just pull the whole envelope into one view, and then shorten our release time so that we just get a little bit of it. And you can even make it even shorter if you want. And what I did there is I just kind of controlled these little controls here to kind of control the shape of the release of the envelope, just to kind of make it a little quicker sounding. And then again, we can send the phase oscillator right into the filter as well, just by clicking here. So let's see what that sounds like with everything. There we go. Another option for Oscillator 1 is the FM mode. And in one of the previous videos, we had talked about FM synthesis as the ability to feed the signal of an oscillator into another oscillator. And that's exactly what this does. When you turn Oscillator 1 in FM mode, basically what you're doing is you're taking the signal of Oscillator 2 and routing it into Oscillator 1. But this time, instead of using like two sine waves like we did in the EFM1 in one of the previous videos, is that we're routing the signal of a sample into a sine wave. And so you can morph the tone that way. Let me just play that for you. Just solo this out. So without it, with it. A little deeper. But what I can also do is pull up the FM amount. We can pull up the FM amount. We get a little bit more of like a knock on it, which is kind of nice. And again, this is also controlled by the the length of our envelope over here too. So I like that. The other thing to keep in mind is that the pitch of the oscillator does matter. So you'll get a different tone out of it depending on what pitch you get. So I'm going to stick with C1. There's also a sidechain oscillator, but we'll talk about that later. All right, so I'm pretty much set with the kick drum here. There's also a modeling oscillator down here that we'll talk about later as well. Let me move up to my snare drum and kind of just tweak this a bit. Here's what the snare drum sounds like now. And actually, in between videos, I pulled up the pitch on the snare just a hair. It used to sound like this. So it's just a little lower. I like pulled up to D sharp, so 3 semitones. There we go. I'm going to turn the filter on for this. I'm going to turn the bit crusher on for this as well. I'm going to use a high pass to kind of scoop out some of the low end in it. Turn off the crusher. There we go. For this, I'm not going to use the first oscillator, but what I am going to use is this noise generator over here. The noise generator, as you can hear, generates noise. Basically what it does, let me turn the filter off just for a moment. Basically what it does is it generates white noise, and then you can apply a low pass, high pass, band pass, or a band pass filter to it. So you can scoop out the highs, the lows, or you can just have a little band of noise. And if you turn it on bypass, it's just white noise. And then you can control the cutoff frequency of the filter here and the resonance of the filter here. And then this is just the volume of the noise. We'll talk about dirt in just a second. So if I put this on bypass, and I'm going to turn off the snare sample there, I basically just get white noise. And you can hear that it just plays continuously because the envelope over here, envelope 4, is pulled all the way out, so my snare drum acts like a one-shot. One way to get around that is to assign a different envelope to just the noise generator. So the noise generator will play just a little puff of noise, and then the snare sample will play its full length. And the way to do that is to use one of our other envelopes. So I'm going to use envelope 3 here, and I'm going to kind of just adjust it so it's kind of short. And I also, you can play with the little controls here to kind of ramp down the volume there, because I just want it to be kind of like a quick little transient is all I want. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say modulate, or the modulation source, excuse me. Modulation source is going to be envelope 3, because that's what I've chosen over here. And then what I can do is just set a range. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the actual volume all the way down, but the envelope volume all the way up. So that means that the noise generator, every single time there's a note down here, is going to trigger the noise generator. These notes are going to trigger the noise generator, and the volume of the noise generator is going to be like this, as opposed to like this, which the snare sample is like. So if I hit play, we just get a little puff of noise. Now, what I'm also going to do, let's pull the volume down a bit here, because this is now going to control the maximum volume, is I'm going to attempt to try to create sort of like a clap sound. So just to show you what the different filters options sound like, here's low pass. You can play with the cutoff. High pass. And band pass. I'm going to stick with the high pass. Let me pull the resonance up a bit. And then I'm also going to play with the dirt option. Now, the dirt almost gives it sort of like a gargled sound, but it's great for kind of emulating like claps, like a hand clap. And let me just shorten the decay time here. By the way, there's a sustain button here. When you click on sustain, it adds this little red slider. And what it does is it turns the envelope into an attack, decay, sustain, that's the red slider, and release. With sustain off, release becomes decay. You just have an attack and a decay. So I'm going to just pull this in to make it a little shorter. There we go. So I've synthesized a clap sound to layer on top of the snare sound. There we go. So I just turned the filter back on, and then I fed the signal of the clap into the filter. All right, so I've kind of customized my snare drum here a bit. Let's move up to the hi-hats. The hi-hats right now sound like this. They sound, I hate to say this, they sound a bit too real, because they are they're a recording of a real hi-hat. I want them to sound a little more fizzly, a little more high-end, a little more synthesized. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using the filter, I'm going to actually show off the 2-band EQ that is included with each voice. So what I'm going to do with my closed hi-hat here is I'm going to turn on my upper band here. Band 1 can be a low band or a low shelf. Band 2 can be an upper shelf or like an upper band. So if I just, this is basically just the gain right here. You can reduce or increase the gain. You can control the frequency of the band. There we go. You can actually grab it down here and move it around as well. And then you can also control the Q. The Q in like a band and an EQ basically just controls the bandwidth. So you can have a wide band or a narrow band, a little notch in there. With the shelves, you basically just get sort of like a change in the slope there. And I'm actually going to go ahead and take advantage of that. And excuse me, for band 1, I'm going to pull down the signal to kind of cut out the low end. Let's see what that sounds like. There we go. Apparently I wasn't cutting enough out. All right, so I'm just going to try to take that same shape and pull it over to the open hi-hat as well. There we go. Let's move up to our synth hits here. This is what the synth hits sound like by themselves. They sound okay, but they're a bit weak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer them with a phase oscillator. I'm just going to kind of throw in a low sine wave. There we go. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah. So that's without and with. So just reinforcing that low C down there with the sine wave that's also on a low C. For the upper one, it's like a C sharp, I believe. So let me just pull all these down so I just have a sine wave. I already kind of set this in advance to C sharp, so let's see what this sounds like. Yeah. Let's use C sharp 2 instead of C sharp 3. There we go. There we go. So I've kind of reinforced the bass on those as well. Now, if I really wanted a real gnarly sounding bass, I could use the FM bass instead. I'll show you what that sounds like. So you just run it through Oscillator 1 in FM mode and pull up the FM depth, and you'll get a real kind of dirty, growly bass. You know what? I think I'll stick with that. Let me do that. Do that for both of these. Yeah, so let's see what the whole pattern sounds like together now. All right, there we go. Just tweaked a couple things and it sounds okay. Let's talk about the modeling oscillator. And what I'm going to do is up here, I'll just pick a couple notes here. What I'm going to actually do is I'm going to create some sort of like plucky sounds. I'm going to make one of them be on the note C, and I'm going to make another one be on G. And the great thing about the modeling oscillator is that it's a physical modeling oscillator is what it is, and the same sort of type of oscillator is also in the sculpture synth, which I'll eventually do a tutorial for as well. Basically, what the modeling oscillator does is what physical modeling does is it attempts to recreate real life timbres, real life tones. And so what you get is just an XY pad with basically 4 main positions, 4 corners to it. The material pad is the XY pad is going to basically determine what sound you're getting. The resolution is how many overtones in that sound are we getting. So I'm going to pull it all the way up to get the most complex sound. And then the types, there's 2 different types for each sound. So in the upper left corner, you get sort of like a metallic, or not a metallic, like a nylon sound. In the upper right, you get sort of like a wooden sound. In the lower right, you get sort of like a glassy bell-like sound. And the lower left, you get sort of a like a steel or metallic sort of sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the plucky sound, the plucky nylon sound. I'm going to set the resolution all the way up, and I'm going to set the pitch to C3. And then what I'm going to do is over here, I'm going to make this the same thing, but I'm just going to change the pitch to G3. So one thing you can do is if you have a setting here that you want to just kind of bring over to another lane here, is you can right-click on it, and you can say Copy, Voice, and Sequence. And you can click on a new lane, right-click, and say Paste Voice. or you can also say pace sequence, but pace voice. Now it's also going to change the name to plucky C like I had before, so I'm going to just change this to plucky G, and then I'm going to change the pitch up to G3. There we go. And then what I'm just going to do is just kind of play around with this, just add some little, you know, kind of random notes in there, just see what this sounds like. Let's see what that sounds like. And I just pan them hard left and hard right to kind of make them almost like a ping pong sort of effect going back and forth. There we go. Now the last oscillator option that we haven't talked about is the sidechain option. So what I'm going to do is up here in this top voice, I'm going to call this sidechain loop. And the reason why I'm calling it sidechain loop is because essentially what the sidechain oscillator does is it lets you input the signal of a loop that's out in your range window. So you can kind of control the playback of that loop with the step sequencer, which is really, really cool. So what I have out in my arrange window here is I have a loop that I've just kind of dragged in advance, and it just sounds like this. So what I'm going to do with this is I actually, believe it or not, I'm going to mute it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sidechain the signal of this into the Ultrabeat so that the Ultrabeat can control the playback of this loop. So anything that's, if you've dealt with sidechaining or compression sidechaining or, you know, sidechaining with in a vocoder, you'll know that the actual sidechain source, the loop or whatever it is you're sidechaining, doesn't have to be active. You can mute the track. So let me just open up Ultrabeat again here. And what I'm going to do is, again, choose sidechain for this top lane, and then go up to sidechain up here and choose a sidechain source. So you'll see blocking move beat 1, that was the name of the loop. And I'm going to go to my step sequencer, and if I hit play, nothing's going to happen. But if I start laying in some steps here on that sidechain loop, and by the way, it's solo, that's why we're only hearing this and not all this down here. What we'll hear is that we'll begin to audibly hear the loop. So I have to press play for this to work. Not just play here in the sequencer, I have to hit play like as in spacebar play. So what we're actually seeing right here is we're seeing a little slice, a little piece of that loop being triggered here, starting at, you know, just right at beat 1. And so you'll only hear it when there's a step in the lane. So what I can do is I can play around with it like this. I can say add every downbeat, and we'll just get little kind of pieces of it. Whoops, again, you got to hit spacebar. And you can play around with this and just kind of grab little bits and pieces of the loop to create your own sort of sliced up and chopped up pattern. What I want to do with this, I'm just going to right click and say clear. What I want to do with this is I want to grab the snares on it. So I'm going to hit, just kind of do something like that. Oops, again, I got to hit spacebar. Actually, the snare's right here. So I just want to grab those snare drums out of it. And there we go. So then what I can do is I can layer that in with the rest of my pattern. And let me just go ahead and drag my pattern down here, just like so. And then we'll just loop this out. And there we go. All right, I apologize if the screen capture is starting to get a little buggy. The video is getting quite long, so the screen capture is having trouble keeping up. So let me just hit play here and see what this sounds like. There we go. One last thing I want to show you real quick is the ability to import sounds from other drum kits into this kit. I can't remember if I showed this or not in the previous episode. If there's a sound in another kit that you really like that you want to import into your current kit, it's actually very simple to do. All you do is you click on this import button right here, and you'll see basically the same menu options as you saw in the drag down menu from within Ultrabeat. So I can say drum kits, and then I can say, let's say I want to grab the Steely Beats kit. What it'll do is it'll load up the whole Steely Beats kit right next to your current kit. And you can click on these and audition them. And you can find a sound that you like. So maybe I want this side stick thing going on. What you can do is you can grab that, drag it into your current kit. It'll pull it in there. And you can do it with multiples. You just hit this up button here to close the imported kit. And now you can use that sound that you just imported in your current kit. That's a little hard to hear. Let me just clear it and put it on the upbeat instead. Right click, add every upbeat, pull the volume up. And some of these imported kits are pretty cool. If you, instead of using the drum kits option, if you use the drum banks, you can like choose from a whole bunch of different kicks or a whole bunch of different snares. So you can say, I want the analog snare bank, and I get basically nothing but snares to pick from, and then you can kind of drag which one you want into your kit and kind of build a custom kit just out of other preset kits. All right, so that concludes this video. In the next episode, we'll talk about the step mode, and then we'll also talk about the multi-output mode, which allows you to kind of mix all of our voices individually, which would be really helpful for this kit because there's a lot going on in it. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks again for watching.